The harsh midday sun beat down on the wooden buildings of Black Hollow, casting long shadows across the dusty main street. Once a bustling frontier town filled with promise, Black Hollow now stood half-abandoned, its weathered structures a testament to forgotten dreams. Tumbleweeds rolled lazily down the empty street, occasionally catching against the hitching posts of the few remaining businesses that stubbornly refused to close their doors. Inside the small clinic at the edge of town, Dr. Isadora Izzie Kane methodically organized her medical supplies, her practiced fingers moving with precision despite the tremor in her left hand. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. A quiet knock at the door broke the silence. "Come in," she called, her voice steady despite the pain that shot through her leg as she turned. Sheriff Eli Graves stepped inside, removing his hat respectfully. "Afternoon, Doc. Brought you some supplies from Carson City." He placed a small wooden crate on her examination table, his eyes carefully avoiding the noticeable limp as she crossed the room. "Much appreciated, Sheriff," Izzie replied, tucking a strand of her raven hair behind her ear. The gesture revealed a small scar that ran along her jawline, one of many marks that told stories she never shared. As she inspected the contents of the crate, the distant sound of horses' hooves thundered down the main street. Both Izzie and the sheriff tensed, their reactions subtle but immediate. "Riders coming," he muttered, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. Izzie's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in her dark eyes, something cold and calculating that disappeared as quickly as it had come. "Probably just passing through," she said quietly, her tone betraying no emotion. But the riders weren't just passing through. 6 men on horseback pulled up outside the saloon, their dusty appearance and heavily armed presence announcing trouble before they'd spoken a word. At their center rode a man whose presence commanded attention, Jasper "Red Jack" Vargas, his red beard and cruel eyes instantly recognizable to anyone who'd seen a wanted poster in the last 5 years. From her clinic window, Izzie watched them dismount. Her right hand unconsciously traced the outline of an old wound on her thigh, the reason for her limp, the reason she now wore a doctor's coat instead of the leather gear she'd once been known for. "That's the Vargas gang," Sheriff Graves said grimly. "They've been terrorizing towns all across the territory." Izzie nodded, her face betraying nothing. "I've heard stories." "You should stay inside, Doc. No telling what those animals might do." A faint smile crossed her lips. "Don't worry about me, Sheriff. I've dealt with worse than a few rowdy outlaws." "Looks like a doctor's office, boss." Jack grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Good. Means we got someone to patch us up if things get rowdy." He laughed, the sound harsh and grating. "Though I hear it's just some crippled lady playing doctor. Probably couldn't save a man with a paper cut." It would be the last mistake he ever made. Have you ever been to a small western town like Black Hollow? Tell me where you're watching from and if you've ever encountered someone who was much more dangerous than they first appeared. The saloon doors crashed open as Red Jack and his men stormed inside, silencing the piano player mid-song. The few patrons at the bar froze, eyes downcast, knowing better than to make eye contact with men of their reputation. Behind the bar, old Tom Wilson gripped a shotgun hidden from view, his knuckles white with tension. "Well, ain't this a sorry excuse for a saloon?" Red Jack bellowed, kicking over a chair as he approached the bar. "Whiskey, the good stuff, not the horse piss you serve these yokels." Tom nodded, setting out a bottle and glasses with trembling hands. The Vargas gang spread throughout the room, claiming tables and eyeing the establishment like wolves surveying a henhouse. His men laughed, ugly sounds that promised violence. Outside, a commotion drew their attention. One of their men stumbled through the doors, clutching a bloodied arm. "Cut myself on that damn fence by the livery," he muttered, embarrassed. At the clinic, Izzie worked methodically, cleaning the deep gash on the outlaw's arm. His breath reeked of whiskey and tobacco as he leaned closer than necessary. "You got gentle hands for a doctor," he slurred, eyeing her figure. "What happened to your leg, darling?" Someone rough you up?" Izzie said nothing, continuing her work with practiced precision. Her silence only encouraged him. When she finished bandaging his arm, the outlaw stood, towering over her. "How much do I owe you, Doc?" "No charge," Izzie replied, her voice steady. "Just doing my job." He laughed, rejoining his companions waiting outside. "Boys, that crippled lady doctor in there couldn't hurt a fly. Probably faint at the sight of real blood." Izzie watched through the window as they sauntered back to the saloon, taking note of each man's build, the weapons they carried, how they moved. Where others saw only swagger, she recognized weaknesses. The way the tallest one favored his right knee, how the youngest carried his gun too high on his hip for a quick draw, the blind spot Red Jack had on his left side. Information, details, weaknesses. These were the things that had once made Isadora Kane the most feared bounty hunter in 3 territories. And old habits die hard. As darkness settled over Black Hollow, Sheriff Eli Graves made his rounds, checking doors and windows of the few remaining businesses. The Vargas gang had claimed the rooms above the saloon, their raucous laughter and occasional gunshots keeping the townsfolk on edge. When he reached the clinic, he found Izzie sitting on her porch, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. "They're planning something big," Eli said quietly, leaning against the railing. "That gold shipment. I sent a rider to warn them, but he won't reach the convoy in time." Izzie nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant saloon. The lamplight cast deep shadows across her face, accentuating the sharp angles of her cheekbones and the hard set of her jaw. "You know who they are, don't you?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. Eli shifted uncomfortably. "Red Jack Vargas, wanted in 4 states. They say he's killed 30 men, that we know of." A faint smile played at the corner of Izzie's mouth. 32, actually, plus 6 women who got in his way." The sheriff studied her for a long moment. "If you were the woman they say you were," he finally whispered, "maybe this town would stand a chance." Izzie's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her cup. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sheriff." "Don't you?" Eli pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket and handed it to her. "Found this in an old wanted poster collection when I took this job." Izzie unfolded the paper, though she knew what she would see. A sketch of a woman with her same sharp features, though harder somehow. Beneath it, the name Isadora Angel of Death Kane, and a reward amount that would make most men's eyes widen. "Is she?" Eli challenged. "Because I heard stories about a bounty hunter who tracked men across states, who could shoot the flame off a candle at 50 paces. They called her the Angel of Death because when she came for you, there was no escape." Memories flooded back unbidden, the thundering of hooves as she pursued her quarry across the open plains, the weight of her Colt Peacemaker in her hand, custom-made with intricate angel wing engravings on the barrel, the reputation she'd built that sent men running at the mere whisper of her name. 7 years ago, that woman took a bullet trying to bring in the Santiago brothers, Izzie said quietly. She was betrayed by someone she trusted, left for dead in a gully outside of Tombstone. Yet here you are. Izzie's eyes hardened. Here I am, patching up drunks and delivering babies. That other life is over. Eli straightened, setting his hat firmly on his head. Those men up there, he nodded toward the saloon. They'll kill everyone in this town if it serves their purpose. As he walked away, his parting words hung in the air. I'm trying. Question is, will you do yours? When the sheriff was gone, Izzie remained on the porch for a long while, the night air cooling the heat in her cheeks. His words had touched something she'd tried to bury deep. The woman she used to be, the legend that had once struck fear into the hearts of the West's most dangerous outlaws. Finally, she rose and entered her clinic, locking the door behind her. Moving to the far corner, she knelt, wincing at the familiar pain in her injured leg, and pried up a loose floorboard. The wooden box beneath hadn't been touched in years, but the brass lock still gleamed in the lamplight. Izzie ran her fingers along the cool metal of the guns, muscle memory taking over as she checked the mechanisms with practiced ease. They still worked perfectly, maintained even in their long exile beneath the floorboards. Before dawn broke, Izzie moved silently through town, planting small bundles in strategic locations. Under the water trough, behind the stack of barrels outside the general store, beneath the loose boards of the old livery stable. Sheriff Graves watched from the shadows, not interfering as she worked. "I'm not doing anything," Izzie replied. "But if something were to happen to the Vargas gang while they're attempting to rob that shipment, it would hardly be a tragedy." As the sun began its descent, Izzie stood in her clinic, watching as Red Jack and his men gathered on the saloon's porch, passing a bottle between them, laughing and boasting about the fortune they'd soon possess. She opened a small cabinet, removing a bottle filled with dark liquid. Not medicine, but whale oil, highly flammable and perfect for her purposes. As she worked, a phrase she hadn't uttered in years slipped from her lips, almost a prayer. "Justice comes on swift wings." The angel of death was awakening, and Black Hollow would never be the same. Darkness settled over Black Hollow like a shroud, the town eerily silent as its inhabitants huddled behind locked doors. The golden glow from the saloon windows cut through the night, spilling onto the street where the Vargas gang made final preparations. Red Jack paced impatiently, his eyes constantly darting toward the trail leading into town. The distant rumble of wagon wheels announced the approaching gold shipment, right on schedule. Red Jack signaled his men, who took up their positions along the street, guns drawn and ready. What they didn't notice was the shadow moving silently from building to building. Izzie, no longer hampered by her limp, her movements fluid and deadly. As the wagon rolled into view, flanked by 4 armed guards, Red Jack stepped into the street. "Evening, gentlemen," he called, his voice carrying in the still night air. "I'm afraid this is where your journey ends." "Take the gold!" Red Jack shouted, advancing toward the wagon. That's when the first trap sprung. An explosion rocked the street as one of Izzie's oil-soaked bundles ignited, sending a barrel flying through the air. It crashed into 2 of Vargas's men, knocking them senseless. Confusion rippled through the gang as a second explosion followed, then a third, each strategically placed to drive the outlaws into the center of town. "What the hell is happening?" Red Jack roared, spinning wildly as smoke filled the street. A shot rang out from the shadows, impossibly precise, striking the gun from the hand of Red Jack's right-hand man. Before anyone could locate the shooter, another outlaw cried out, a throwing knife embedded in his shoulder. "We're being ambushed!" someone shouted. Red Jack raised his gun toward a movement in the alley. "Show yourself, coward!" Instead, more shots came, each finding its mark, not killing, but disabling. A bullet to a knee, another through a hand, a knife thrown with surgical precision into a thigh. The remaining outlaws huddled together, back to back, firing blindly into the darkness. The smoke began to clear, revealing the aftermath of Izzie's deadly efficiency. 4 of the Vargas gang lay wounded, disarmed, and moaning in the dirt. 2 others had fled into the night, and Red Jack stood alone in the center of the street, his face contorted with rage and fear. "Is this your doing, Sheriff?" he shouted. "Do you think this changes anything? I'll burn this whole town to the ground." "The sheriff had nothing to do with this," came a woman's voice, calm and cold as winter air. "You boys made one mistake," she said, her voice carrying easily in the stunned silence. "You underestimated me." Red Jack stared at Izzie, incomprehension slowly giving way to dawning horror. He let out a bark of laughter, though the sound held no humor. Izzie said nothing, her silence more unnerving than any threat. She stood perfectly still, the stance of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The remaining members of the Vargas gang shifted nervously. Their earlier confidence evaporated like morning dew under the desert sun. "You know what?" Red Jack continued, his hand inching toward his holstered gun. "I don't care who you think you are. You're dead either way." His hand moved in a blur, drawing his revolver with a speed that had made him infamous across 3 territories. But Izzie was faster, impossibly faster. Her Colt was already aimed, and she fired a single shot that sent his gun spinning from his grip, taking a piece of his thumb with it. Red Jack howled in pain and disbelief, clutching his bleeding hand. "How did you—" "I could have put that bullet between your eyes," Izzie interrupted, her voice steady. "Remember that." One of the other outlaws, seeing his boss wounded, made a desperate move for his weapon. Without even turning her head, Izzie fired her second Colt, the bullet grazing his ear with such precision it could only be deliberate. "The next one goes through your skull," she warned. A flicker of recognition crossed Red Jack's face as he stared at her guns, at the distinctive angel wing engravings catching the moonlight. "Those Colts," he whispered, his face draining of color. "It can't be—" "The Angel of Death," one of his men gasped, the words barely audible. "I thought she was just a story to scare outlaws." Izzie stepped closer, the lamplight from the saloon illuminating her features. "The stories didn't do me justice." Red Jack's bravado crumbled. "They said you were dead." The remaining members of the Vargas gang exchanged terrified glances. They'd heard the tales, how the Angel of Death never failed to bring in her quarry, how she could track a man across 1,000 miles of desert, how those who surrendered to her might live to see prison, but those who resisted never lived to tell the tale. "Listen," Red Jack said, his voice suddenly conciliatory. "We didn't know who you were. This is all just a misunderstanding. We'll leave town, never come back." "A misunderstanding?" Izzie's voice was soft, dangerous. "Like how you misunderstood when that family in Tucson begged for their lives? Or when you burned down that homestead in Rio Blanco with the children still inside?" She circled him slowly like a wolf around wounded prey. "I know every crime you've committed, Jasper Vargas. Every life you've taken. Every bounty on your head." She paused. "And they add up to quite a sum." "You can have the gold," he offered desperately. "All of it. Just let me ride out of here." Izzie's laugh was hollow, devoid of mirth. "This was never about the gold." She looked around at the other outlaws, who were frozen in terror. "Drop your weapons, all of you. On the ground, now." As guns clattered to the dirt, Sheriff Graves emerged from the shadows, rifle in hand. The few townspeople brave enough to peek from their windows watched in awe as the legend they'd only heard whispered about came to life before their eyes. "The Angel of Death," someone murmured. "She's been here all along." Red Jack's cooperation was short-lived. As Sheriff Graves moved to handcuff one of the fallen outlaws, Jack made his desperate play. With a swift motion, he pulled a hidden knife from his boot and lunged at Izzie. "You're not taking me alive," he snarled. Izzie sidestepped the attack with practiced ease, but instead of shooting him, she holstered one of her Colts. This was personal now. This needed to be settled the old way. "Always figured you for a coward, Jack," she taunted, circling him. "Hiding behind your men, preying on the weak." Jack slashed wildly with his knife, his movements growing increasingly desperate. "You think you're some kind of legend? You're nothing. Just another bounty hunter who got lucky." Izzie's eyes never left his, reading his next move before he made it. When he lunged again, she caught his wrist, twisting until the knife fell from his grip. In the same fluid motion, she delivered a crushing blow to his sternum that sent him stumbling backward. 38 innocent people," she said, advancing on him. "That's how many lives you've taken that I know of." "Don't insult me with lies," Izzie cut him off. "I've hunted men like you my whole life. I know what you are." He made one final, desperate attempt, pulling a derringer from his vest. Before he could aim, Izzie's throwing knife embedded itself in his shoulder. He screamed, the tiny gun dropping from his nerveless fingers. "You could have killed me," he gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder as he cowered against the watering trough. Izzie stood over him, her remaining Colt pointed at his head. "Death would be too merciful. You're going to stand trial for every life you've taken. You're going to rot in a cell, forgotten by everyone, watching the world go on without you." Jack's eyes darted frantically, searching for escape. "I didn't know who you were," he pleaded. "If I'd known—" "You never thought to ask," Izzie replied coldly. Then she brought the butt of her gun down on his temple, knocking him unconscious. The street fell silent. Sheriff Graves approached, surveying the fallen outlaws with a mixture of awe and relief. "Reckon the territorial prison's about to get some new guests," he said, helping Izzie bind Red Jack's hands. "Is it over?" one of them asked. "For now," she answered quietly. As the morning sun climbed higher, the people of Black Hollow emerged from their homes, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. They gathered in the street, staring in wonder at the scene before them. The notorious Vargas gang defeated, bound and guarded by Sheriff Graves and the surviving convoy guards. But most eyes were fixed on Izzie, who stood apart, cleaning blood from her knife with methodical precision. She was transformed in their eyes, no longer just the quiet doctor who tended their ailments, but something far more dangerous and awe-inspiring. Old Tom from the saloon was the first to approach her. "All this time," he said, shaking his head in disbelief, "we had no idea who was really living among us." "That was the point," Izzie replied, not looking up from her task. Izzie finally raised her eyes, surveying the gathered faces. "Because no one looks closely at dying things," she said simply, "and because I was dying too." The bounty hunter's injuries had been real. The bullet that shattered her femur, the knife wound that damaged the nerves in her hand. But what the townsfolk were only now understanding was how much of her weakness had been a carefully constructed facade. A wagon was brought around to transport the prisoners. As the Vargas gang was loaded up, Sheriff Graves approached Izzie, hat in hand. "I'll be taking them to the territorial prison," he said. "The reward money. It's rightfully yours." The sheriff nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "Those stories about you, they said you never let a bounty escape alive, that you were merciless." "Stories grow in the telling," Izzie replied, her face unreadable. "I brought in more men alive than dead. It's just that the dead ones make for better tales around a campfire." As the sheriff prepared to leave with his prisoners, he paused one last time, tipping his hat toward Izzie. "Guess legends don't die easy," he said, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "No," she agreed, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "They just change shape." "What happens now, Doc?" someone finally asked. Izzie didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked back toward her clinic, her movements once again showing the slight limp she'd always possessed, not as pronounced as she'd pretended, but real nonetheless. At the door, she turned back to face them. Word spread like wildfire across the territory. The Angel of Death had returned. Telegraph wires hummed with the news, newspapers printed special editions, and in saloons from Santa Fe to Tombstone, men spoke in hushed tones about the woman they'd believed was just a legend. For Izzie, life in Black Hollow attempted to return to normal, though normal had been irrevocably altered. Patients still came to her clinic, but now they entered with a reverence bordering on fear, their eyes lingering on her hands that could heal broken bones but had also ended countless lives. 3 weeks after the Vargas incident, a letter arrived from the territorial governor, thanking her for her service and offering a substantial reward. Izzie burned it without reply. That evening, as she closed up the clinic, she noticed a rider watching from the ridge overlooking town, too distant to identify, but close enough to send a chill down her spine. By morning, they were gone. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," Tom said when she mentioned it at the saloon, which had transformed from a den of iniquity to a respectable establishment. "Every bounty hunter worth his salt is talking about you. Some say you're back in the game." "I'm not," Izzie replied firmly, though her hand unconsciously drifted to the Colt now hidden beneath her doctor's coat. A week later, Black Hollow received another visitor, U.S. Marshal Daniel Fletcher, a stern-faced man whose reputation for honesty was as well known as his uncompromising pursuit of justice. "Dr. Kane," he greeted her formally when he found her restocking supplies in her clinic. "Or do you prefer your other title?" "Doctor will do just fine," Izzie replied coolly. "What brings a marshal to our little town?" Fletcher studied her for a long moment. "Justice is a strange thing, isn't it? Some seek it through the law, others—" He gestured vaguely toward her, "through more direct methods." "I'm retired," Izzie stated flatly. "So I've heard," Fletcher nodded. "But retirement has a way of ending when the right motivation comes along." He placed a folded paper on her examination table. "This arrived at my office last week. Thought you might want to see it before it becomes public." "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Santiago," Fletcher replied. "Joaquin Santiago, the one who got away, the one who put that bullet in your leg." Izzie's fingers crumpled the paper. "He should be dead." "Well, he's not," the marshal said grimly. "And now he's a judge in Arizona territory. A very powerful, very corrupt judge who doesn't want his past coming back to haunt him. Because," he said simply, "sometimes the law needs an angel." That night, Izzie sat alone in her clinic, the wanted poster spread before her on the table. The lamplight cast long shadows across the room as she traced the outline of Joaquin Santiago's face with her fingertip. 7 years had changed him. His face was fuller, his hair now streaked with gray, his eyes those of a man who believed himself untouchable. She still remembered the night he betrayed her. They had been partners, tracking the Santiago brothers, the most notorious bank robbers in the territory. What she hadn't known was that Joaquin was the third brother, working from inside the law to protect his family. When the moment came to make the arrest, he'd put a bullet in her back, another through her leg, and left her for dead in a ravine outside Tombstone. Izzie opened the wooden box that contained her past, running her fingers over the leather-bound journal where she'd recorded every bounty, every chase, every capture. In the back was a sketch, her own drawing of Joaquin from when they'd worked together. She'd trusted him, perhaps the only man she'd ever truly trusted. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She closed the journal quickly, her hand moving instinctively to her gun. "Figured you'd still be up," he said, setting his hat on the rack. "Marshal Fletcher left town. Told me what he showed you." Izzie nodded, gesturing to the wanted poster. "Santiago wants me silenced before I can expose him." "What are you going to do?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the flame of the oil lamp. "What would you have me do, Sheriff? Hide for the rest of my life? Wait for his hired guns to find me?" "You could leave," he suggested. "Start over somewhere new. You've done it before." "And how many innocent people would suffer under Santiago's corruption while I'm hiding?" she countered. "How many criminals would he set free because they paid him well enough?" The sheriff didn't answer, knowing there was no argument that would sway her. Instead, he placed a telegram on the table beside the wanted poster. "This came for you," he said quietly, "from the governor himself." Izzie broke the seal and read the message, her expression revealing nothing, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped the paper. "He's offering me a position," she said finally, "Special Deputy U.S. Marshal, to investigate corruption in the Arizona judiciary." "A legitimate way to go after Santiago," Graves nodded, "without becoming an outlaw yourself." "I stopped believing in legitimacy a long time ago, Sheriff." "Maybe it's time to start again," he replied, "or at least use it when it serves your purpose." After the sheriff left, she opened the clinic's back door and stepped out into the cool night air. The stars stretched endlessly above her, the same stars she'd navigated by during countless nights on the trail. In the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely, haunting sound that seemed to echo the emptiness inside her. Her decision was already made, though she wasn't ready to admit it yet. Santiago was out there, believing himself safe behind his judge's bench, never suspecting that the woman he'd left for dead was about to rise from the grave and bring a reckoning 7 years in the making. Old habits resurfaced easily. Checking her guns twice, securing knives in hidden sheaths, testing the balance of each throwing blade. The familiar weight of her leather vest felt right, like greeting an old friend after a long absence. When she stepped outside, Leading her dappled gray mare, she found nearly half the town waiting. The surprise must have shown on her face because Tom chuckled softly. "Didn't think you could just ride off without saying goodbye, did you?" "We don't want a proper doctor," someone called out. "We want you to come back when you're done." Sheriff Graves pushed through the crowd, leading his own horse. "I'm riding with you to the territorial border," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "After that, you're on your own." Izzie nodded her acceptance, knowing it would be pointless to refuse. As they mounted up, an elderly woman pressed a small cloth bundle into Izzie's hand. "Biscuits for the journey," she explained. "And this." She placed a silver locket in Izzie's palm. "It belonged to my daughter. Has a saint's medal inside. For protection." "Then consider it protection for those you'll save from Santiago's corruption." Izzie tucked the locket into her pocket, oddly moved by the gesture. With a final nod to the gathered townsfolk, she turned her horse toward the trail leading south. "They'll remember this," Graves said as they rode side by side. "The day the angel of death rode out to bring justice once more." "I'm not doing this for legend or glory," Izzie responded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I know," he replied simply. "You're doing it because it's who you are." As Black Hollow receded behind them, Izzie felt the weight of her dual identities, healer and hunter, savior and destroyer. Perhaps they weren't as contradictory as she'd once believed. Perhaps both served the same fundamental purpose, to restore balance in a world tipped too far toward suffering. Miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, the landscape gradually shifting from the familiar to the unknown. Somewhere ahead lay Arizona territory, and within it, Joaquin Santiago, the man who had broken her body but failed to break her spirit. The hunt had begun again. In the town of Diablo Springs, Arizona territory, the saloon hummed with the usual evening crowd. Miners fresh from their claims, cowboys between cattle drives, and the occasional drifter passing through. The piano player hammered out a lively tune, nearly drowning the clatter of poker chips and the constant murmur of conversations. When the batwing doors swung open, few paid attention to the newcomer. A tall man with a weathered face and cold eyes. His black duster was coated with the dust of long travel, and the gun on his hip had seen considerable use. He moved with the deliberate confidence of someone accustomed to commanding respect. "Whiskey," he ordered, tossing a coin onto the bar. The stranger took a slow sip before answering, "Looking for someone." "Lot of someones passed through Diablo Springs. Anyone in particular?" The stranger's eyes scanned the room carefully before returning to the bartender. "The angel of death." A hush fell over the nearby tables, the name acting like a spell that silenced even the most boisterous drinkers. The bartender's hand paused mid-wipe on a glass. "That's not a name folks mention lightly around here," he said quietly, "especially not lately." The stranger leaned forward. "I heard she's back, that she's hunting again." "Listen, friend," the bartender whispered. "I don't know what business you have with her, but Judge Santiago doesn't take kindly to people asking questions about the angel. Been some other curious types coming through recently. They didn't stay healthy for long." The stranger smiled, though it never reached his eyes. "I'm not worried about Judge Santiago." "You should be," the bartender warned. "He practically owns this territory." The stranger finished his whiskey in one swallow and set the glass down with deliberate care. "Where can I find her?" The bartender shook his head. "You've got it all wrong, mister. That's not how it works with the angel of death." He leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. "You don't find her, she finds you." The stranger's smile widened slightly as he pushed away from the bar. "Well then," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, including the men in the corner, "I guess I'll just have to make myself noticeable." As he stepped back into the night, the silver-haired man at the corner table, Judge Joaquin Santiago himself, motioned to his companion. "Find out who that was," he ordered, a flicker of unease crossing his otherwise composed features. "And send word to our men watching the northern roads." The hunt had indeed begun, but who was predator and who was prey remained to be seen. If you thought this story was intense, you won't want to miss what happens in our next video. The angel of death is coming for justice, and no corrupt judge is safe when she's on the hunt.